In episode 1 of season 2, all of the Hargraves children are sent back in time to the same alley in Dallas, Texas, only they're sent back in different years. Klaus and Ben arrive in 1960, with Allison arriving in 1961, Luther arriving in 1962,
Diego arriving in September of 1963,
Vanya arriving in October of 1963, and then finally number 5 arrives in November of 1963. But he arrives to a very different alley, because the Soviets have invaded the United States and there is a war going on. And 5's first thought is, alright, what did we do now? But to his surprise, when he goes out to the streets, all of the Hargraves children are fighting alongside each other, and fighting against the Soviets. Diego says to him, hey, it's about time you showed up. But then Hazel shows up and says, hey, if you want to live, come with me, because those things in the sky right there, those are nuclear weapons, and everybody here is about to get blown off the map. And 5, who realizes that he can't save his family if he's dead, goes with him. So Hazel and 5 travel back to the same location just 10 days earlier. And Hazel's not really interested in helping 5. He's really just fulfilling a promise to Agnes on her deathbed. Agnes died of cancer, but they had 20 good years. And as they're making small talk about the commission, all of a sudden these 3 albinos get off a bus and draw guns at both Hazel and 5. And Hazel slips something into 5's pocket, hands him the briefcase, and gets lit up. 5 is able to get away and evade these guys, but the briefcase is shot to bits. He then goes back to the alley that he arrived in and notices that there's a place that has a camera set up, filming and taking pictures of the alley. So he heads into there to find a conspiracy theorist. And this guy used to just sell TVs and radios in this place until 3 years ago when Klaus showed up. He tells 5 that 5 times in the past 3 years there's been an electrical anomaly, a blue light, and then someone appears in that alley, and he wasn't quite sure what was going on, but he's got pictures of aliens and newspaper clippings all typed up. So 5 is looking at the pictures, and sure enough, it's his brothers and sisters, and he asked the conspiracy theorist, a guy named Elliot, if he knows where any of these people are, and the only person's location that he knows of is Diego's, because there's a newspaper clipping about this crazy guy who was arrested and thrown in an insane asylum. And in that insane asylum, Diego's been locked up because he keeps talking about how somebody wants to kill the president in a few days and he needs to stop it. And they chalk it up to just a guy with a hero complex, which Diego kind of does have. So 5 goes to visit him to tell him that the world is once again going to end in 10 days. But all Diego can think about is getting out of there and saving the president's life. Even after 5 explains that Diego saving the president's life probably started a nuclear war, all Diego can focus on is the fact that he was able to do it. He was able to save Kennedy's life. And 5 doesn't want to let that happen. It's the butterfly effect. So he realized that he can't rely on Diego and tells the guards, hey, by the way, he's planning an escape so that they'll lock him up and he can't get out. Now, the other Hargraves children are either in Dallas or slowly making their way back, like Klaus and Ben, who were out in California for a while, and Ben never wanted to leave California and is really being dragged against his will back to Dallas because, he's still dead. And they get into a fight about that and a fight about Klaus allowing their car to break down. So the two are forced to walk to this bar in the middle of nowhere and ask the bartender, hey, do you know when the next bus to Dallas is? And he says, yeah, tomorrow at 3 p.m. And Klaus is wearing this flamboyant outfit in the middle of Texas. So he's kind of getting some guff from the bar patrons who ask him, hey, do you want to play some poker? Thinking that he can be an easy mark. But Klaus is taking them for all their money. And one of the guys there is kind of sick of losing, so he's trying to bully Klaus out of a huge pot and offers to put up more than the money. He wants Klaus to put up his necklace. And Ben, who is behind this guy, tells Klaus, by the way, he's bluffing. So Klaus obliges and says, okay, well then put up the keys to your car, because that could be their way to Dallas. But when the guy puts his cards down, Ben screwed him over because the guy's a full house. And that was something that Klaus is shocked to learn of, but he still grabs the keys. The guys want to fight him and Klaus tries to harness the powers of Ben, but Ben says, no, I'm going to sit this one out, being petty. So it forces Klaus to run out of the bar, hop in the truck, and get the hell out of there. Although they're arrested for stealing the car shortly after they arrive over the Dallas border. Then there's Allison, who is married to a political activist named Raymond. And both Raymond and Allison are very active in the African-American community in Dallas. Shortly after Allison arrived, she saw the segregation firsthand when she entered a bar and it said whites only. And Raymond is really excited about President Kennedy and the future. And Allison, who knows what happens to Kennedy, tells him, I just don't want you to get your hopes up, because she still hasn't told him where she came from or about her powers. And Allison's doing pretty well for herself. She owns her own salon, where both her and Raymond hold community gatherings to talk about how to enact social change for their people. But one night, as they're having one of those meetings, this racist from across the street comes over and demands to know why they're having a gathering that late at night. And when Raymond basically touches his foot, he claims that he was assaulted, and that's when Allison actually jacks him up. And this future MAGA bro has to leave with his tail between his legs in a seersucker suit. Now, Vanya crawled out of that alley delirious and was hit by a car, and the family that hit her has taken her in because Vanya doesn't remember anything. And she's been staying with this family for about a month, taking care of their child named Harlan, who doesn't speak. And while the woman of the household, named Sissy, likes having Vanya around, the man of the household, named Carl, seems to want to get her out of there, constantly posting ads in the classifieds about a missing woman. And Carl is kind of a jackass. He's a salesman. And that night he heads out to meet with a client, saying that he would be back late. That same night, Vanya can't sleep and heads into the kitchen to find Sissy smoking, and the two go off to the barn to smoke outside and have a chat about how Carl and Sissy met at a young age, and how Sissy had to give up her dreams. Sissy also tells Vanya that she has a coffee can with a bunch of money squirreled away, but not to leave Carl. It's actually in preparation of Carl leaving her, either on his own or by death. And while she does like Carl, it doesn't really seem like she's that in love with him. And then finally there's Luther, who's working as a bodyguard for a club owner. He's also doing these underground fights for money. And one of the guys in the club that night just so happens to be Carl, Sissy's husband. And Carl is talking to the owner, Mr. Ruby, about a business opportunity, but he is drunk. And as Luther is talking to one of the waitresses, asking if that guy's a problem over there, she says, no, not yet. The person I'm actually worried about is the kid over there. And the kid is number 5. But Luther doesn't really want to have anything to do with 5 because he's still pissed off for leaving him in the 60s. But 5 tells him, we don't have time to squabble like this. We have 10 days to wrangle everybody up because the world ending followed us. It's going to happen again. But Luther says, I don't really care, and walks off. But Luther should care, because Diego, who was locked up in the insane asylum in one of those padded rooms, has picked his way out. He ends up stumbling down the hallway and getting caught by an orderly, but the orderly is knocked out by a girl named Lila. And Lila and Diego have kind of formed a friendship in the asylum. But there are alarms going off. And it's not for Diego, it's because the 3 albinos have broken in there and are trying to track him down. Diego unlocks all of the doors, letting everybody out as to cause a distraction, and he is able to get away. Now, in episode 2, we'll start off in the bar where number 5 isn't taking no for an answer. He follows Luther, trying to pester him about the importance of saving the world, but Luther has carved out a nice life being this guy's bodyguard. And that's when 5 realizes who he's working for. He's working for Jack Ruby, aka the guy that shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And Ruby is still being pestered by Carl, while sitting behind Ruby are these guys with black suits and sunglasses on, at night in a bar. Just very shady looking people. But Luther wants to go take care of Carl because he's outworn his welcome, but 5 stops him saying, I get it. You got sent to the moon, you watched Pogo die, you saw the world explode, and then you get sent back to the 60s, and I'm sorry about that, I really am. But the Umbrella Academy needs you. You're number 1. And Luther says, I'm not number 1. Because there is no Umbrella Academy in the 1960s. And the Umbrella Academy never needed me. Luther then goes and takes care of Carl, and as he's kicking him out, Carl drops his wallet. And as 5 turns to watch Carl get kicked out, he tears his jacket a little bit. But when he checks his jacket, he finds the thing that Hazel put in his jacket. And it's something called the Frankel footage. And it has the date 11/22/63 on it, which is the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So he heads back to Elliot's place and has Elliot develop the footage, and as Elliot is doing that, he heads off to try to go find Diego, which we'll get back to later. Because after Carl got kicked out, he calls up Sissy to pick him up from the bar. But as Sissy is leaving, Harlan wants her to stay and read him a bedtime story. So Vanya volunteers to go pick up Carl. And you can tell that Sissy is really grateful to have Vanya in her life. And when Vanya picks him up, Carl is asking, does she hate me? Does she still love me? And Vanya says, yeah, she still loves you, but she's pretty pissed at you because you lied to her. At this point, though, back in the bar, Luther has found that wallet. And when he steps outside to see if Carl is still out there, he sees Vanya picking him up, although Vanya doesn't recognize him because she doesn't remember anything. And he still holds a lot of resentment towards Vanya about what she did. So the next day, he heads over to their place to try to talk to her, but when he finds her, she's playing hide and seek in the barn with Harlan. He approaches her, calling her by name, but she doesn't recognize him. And she asks, do I know you? And he thinks she's playing a joke on him, but she says, I'm sorry, I had an accident, and I don't remember anything. And the innocent nature of the conversation kind of turns Luther, because Vanya apologizes if there's anything she did to this guy, and he says, no, I'm the one who's supposed to apologize. I wronged you, and instead of helping you, I did the opposite. And I don't know if you're just playing off not remembering. I don't know if you want to start a new life here, but just know that I really am sorry. She still has no idea what he's talking about. She's just relieved that somebody knows who she is. Although Sissy sneaks up behind him and has him at gunpoint, demanding to know why he's there, and he hands over Carl's wallet to her, saying that he dropped it in the club. That night, Sissy and Vanya are talking alone, and Vanya is saying how she wished she remembered. She wished she knew what this guy was talking about. And Sissy warns her to just stay away from him, because any guy who apologizes in that day and age, he must have done something really wrong to you. She then tries to read Vanya's palm, but you definitely get some lesbian vibes. That night, though, as she's sleeping, she has her first memory of her old life. And the memory is of her on stage holding up Luther with her powers. And she wakes up from this nightmare, grabs the keys to the car, and leaves in the middle of the night. Now, over at Allison's, she's sitting there with Raymond just watching TV when the cops burst in and arrest him for assaulting that guy. Even after Allison says he didn't do anything, it was me, they're still taking him in. She tries to do the rumor trick, which you can tell she hasn't done in a while, and she even has the one cop under her spell, but after Raymond says it's fine, she lets him go. The next day, she heads over to the police station and wants to see her husband, but the cops are giving her a hard time, saying that he's still being processed. And Raymond just so happens to be being held in the same jail as Klaus. And we get more of an idea what Klaus has been up to the last 3 years when a guy gets arrested for handing out pamphlets without a permit. This guy gets thrown in jail, but when he sees Klaus, he goes, "Dude, you changed my life. I saw you speak at Berkeley, and I quit my practice that day and have been spouting your teachings." Although Klaus doesn't want to talk to this guy. He actually goes on the opposite side of the cell and mentions how heavy is the head that wears the crown, and Raymond corrects him because Raymond used to teach Shakespeare before he got involved in politics. And they have a whole conversation about how Klaus no longer wants to be looked up to by these people. But Klaus ends up getting bailed out when the governor calls in a favor for him. That's how powerful Klaus has become. And as he's walking out, Raymond says, "Well, hey, if you really do have powerful friends, let them know that there are brothers in here who are being held without cause." And Klaus looks back at the cop and says, "Is that true?" And the cop says, "You're more than welcome to file a complaint." That night, Klaus heads to this big mansion that has been abandoned for a while because there's sheets all over the furniture, and lays down. But on the wall, there is a painting of Klaus, painted as kind of this god with the words hello written on one hand and goodbye on the other. Now, Allison didn't see Klaus get bailed out, but later that day, she is able to finally meet with Raymond, and she does the typical thing, apologizing for him being there when she should be there, vowing to get him out. But as she's leaving, she notices that pamphlet guy's hands,
which say hello and goodbye.
and she says, "Where did you get that?" And he says, "All the children of the prophet have them." And she says, "Well, does that prophet have a name?" And of course, yeah, the name's Klaus. Now back to 5, who has located Diego, who successfully broke out with Lila, and they've driven over to Lee Harvey Oswald's work and are waiting to take him out. And 5 teleports into the car and wants Diego to come with him, but Diego has no interest in that whatsoever. Problem is, Diego is wanted by the cops, and number 5 uses that to his advantage, threatening to bring them over there if he doesn't come with him. So Diego reluctantly agrees, but says, "I'm bringing Lila with me." So the 3 of them head back over to Elliot's place, but Elliot, who has developed the film and seen it, is pretty shook by it. And he's got them at gunpoint, demanding to know if they are enemies of the people. And they kind of look at each other like, well, I guess it depends on the people. But neither Diego or 5 are too worried about this. 5 teleports over to him, knocking the gun away, and Diego grabs it. They then tie Elliot up and watch the tape. And the tape is nothing more than the Zapruder film with just a different name. But they're trying to figure out why Hazel gave it to 5. And that's when they see it. It's Reginald Hargraves, of all people, on the grassy knoll. So they need to locate their dad, and they head to the phone book and find the address of his umbrella company. And as they're leaving, they're planning on leaving Elliot there, but what do you do about Lila? And Lila has hidden off in a closet because she's kind of worried about what she's seen. Not only 5 teleporting over, but film of something that isn't supposed to happen for another 6 days. And the last time she started seeing stuff like this, they threw her in an insane asylum and she doesn't want to go back. So Diego kind of talks her off the crazy ledge and then asks her if she can keep an eye on Elliot. Then both Diego and 5 head over to the umbrella company, and 5 makes mention that he hasn't seen his dad in 40 plus years. But every day that he was alone in the future, he could hear his dad talking to him, telling him, "I told you so." And Diego reminds him, well, this Reginald Hargraves hasn't met you yet, so he can't tell you I told you so. But 5 has a sneaking suspicion that he'll find his own way. They're able to break into the umbrella company, but it looks like it's a front because everything is covered in dust. And upon snooping around, they're wondering what kind of stuff Reginald is into, because he's got rooms set up with mannequins and fake cul-de-sacs on the walls. He's even got an invitation to the Mexican consulate in Dallas. And as Diego is snooping around, he hears somebody leave, and it's Reginald, so he starts following him. 5, who is also snooping around, hears something, but it's a monkey. And he's relieved to see baby Pogo, but when he gets down, Pogo doesn't know him like that. He's also not talking yet, and Pogo attacks him and escapes. Diego, who was tracking his father, has lost him, and Reginald now has the jump on Diego, and they start getting into a fight. Diego ends up getting the better of him, but as he's about to hit him with a pipe in the head, he can't bring himself to do it, saying, "Dad?" Although once again, Reginald doesn't know these guys. So Reginald takes that opportunity to stab Diego, calling him an amateur, and leaving him to bleed out. And as he's walking away, he claps for Pogo to join him, and the two escape in an alley. And finally, you find out what happened to the handler. Yeah, she was shot in the head, but she survived because there was a plate in there. And after 3 months, she heads back to work, but she heads back to a different commission. And when she goes into her office, she finds a talking fish named AJ who has told her that while he's thankful for her service, she is being demoted. And she is not happy about that because she wants to go after number 5. And he says, no, we've already taken care of that. And they've taken care of it by sending those 3 albinos that they call the Swedes, who are being instructed to go after all of the Hargraves children. And they have posted up shop at this old woman's house after they killed her, where they await instructions. So the handler heads over to her new desk, pissed off, and she gets even more pissed off when she sees the irony in the fact that she is sitting at the desk that she put number 5 at. In episode 4, you get a better look into Lila and the handler's relationship. In 1993 in England, the handler killed Lila's parents, but then realized that there was a child in the house. So instead of killing the child, she took her in, raising her as her own, and training her like Hannah. And if you're not familiar with Hannah, I have a recap for seasons 1 and 2 of the Amazon Prime show. Very good. So we move back to the present day where the handler informs her that she has to protect number 5 at all costs. And Lila doesn't understand this because the handler got demoted because of number 5. But the handler says, well, he's worth more to me alive than dead, so protect him. They then move on to the Swedes, and Lila's very surprised to find out that the handler knows who they are. The handler's surprised to find out that they were there, but Lila's pissed because they were coming after her and she could have died. The handler says, well, if they wanted you dead, you would have already been dead. She then reassures her that nobody is trying to kill her. Now, over on the other side of town, Luther wakes up pretty banged and bruised, but he's got a visitor, Vanya. And Vanya found out where he lived from 5, and the two have a conversation about how much of an asshole 5 is, but also how much 5 filled her in. But the one thing she wants to know is what caused the apocalypse, and Luther says, well, you did. But just to let you know, I was a part of it. The whole time, Luther is trying to justify it, but this is shocking news to Vanya. And she can't figure out how she did it or why she did it, and Luther says, well, you just got angry. You blew up the moon. The two interrupted, though, when Jack Ruby burst through the door because he is pissed off at Luther. Luther cost him a lot of money to a lot of people that could make his life a living hell. And Luther is vowing to make it right with Ruby, but Ruby says, no, you know what? I'm done, and walks out. And Luther is so mad that he punches a hole through the wall to see that number 5 is waiting for Vanya outside. So Vanya thinks that it's best to leave Luther by himself for a little bit, but when she walks outside and sees 5, she says, I'm going to the farm. She no longer wants to hang out with 5 because she's so pissed off at him for not telling her the truth about how the world ended and everything else. And says to him, do you have any other family secrets that you want to share? And he says, yeah, a bunch, but I don't have time for it. Right before she's about to leave, he says, look, the clock is ticking on doomsday. I just need to know that you're going to be ready once I call upon you. And Vanya looks at him and says, I can't help you. I don't even know who I am. And 5 says, well, you're our sister and you're a part of the Umbrella Academy. And she says, no, 5, that's who I was, and speeds off. So 5 heads back to Elliot's place where, under the cover of night, Lila has returned and she's patching up Diego, and Diego is just surprised that 5 allowed Vanya to leave. He asks, how do we know that those Swedes aren't going to go after her? And 5 doesn't know. Lila asks, hey, any idea who sent those people? And 5 says, yeah, I have my suspicions. But right now, the priority is finding out where Reginald Hargraves is, and luckily, 5 has an idea because of that invitation to the Mexican consulate. And that party is that night. And as Diego is reading off the invitation, Elliot recognizes one of the names because he's a conspiracy theorist. And that guy is a part of this group called the Majestic 12. It's the secret committee of scientists and military folk, a deep state organization that Kennedy has been pushing their members into the light. And Elliot even has a picture of most of them. 11 of them, all but one. And that's when the group realized that the 12th member is probably Reginald Hargraves. So they know where they're going to be that night. Now, Klaus is just starting his day waking up on Allison's couch, and Allison is frantically calling hospitals because Raymond didn't come home that night, and it's very unlike him. And the two start having a conversation with Allison beating herself up over using the I heard a rumor trick. And Klaus the whole time is trying to make her feel better about the situation, but it's not really working. The two end up going their separate ways, with Klaus going to track down David, and he finds him in a diner having lunch with one of his uncles. And when his uncle gets up to use the bathroom, that's when Klaus slips in and starts talking to him about the Vietnam War, trying to convince him not to enlist. Eventually, though, the uncle comes back, and the uncle is a raging homophobe, and he's instructing David to punch Klaus in the face. Klaus, meanwhile, is telling David that he doesn't need to enlist in the military, he can be his own man. But at the behest of his uncle, David stands up and clocks Klaus. And Klaus is so upset that he heads to a liquor store. And this is the first time he's using drugs or alcohol in 3 years. But the guy wants to go on a bender, and he does. And when he heads back to the mansion that day, unfortunately for him, his followers have found him, so he has to flee back to Allison's couch. Although Allison has located somebody of her own, and it's Raymond. But she's pretty mad at Raymond because he's holding a meeting in the salon without her. So the two get into it on the side of the street, and she's pissed off at him for not calling, but it's all because he feels like he's been played. He feels like that she has been planted there by somebody. He doesn't know who, but by somebody, because it's really weird. All of a sudden, she shows up, she's reading his pamphlets, she wants to join the group. He feels like he's been infiltrated, but she can't believe she's being accused of this. Ray says, all right, well then what did you say to the cop? And she says, I just asked him to stop beating on you, and he doesn't believe that. He asked her to explain because she did say, I can explain, but she doesn't say a word, and Ray just heads back into the salon with Allison left on the sidewalk. She's then just walking around town when she ends up seeing Luther shoveling barbecue in his mouth, getting drunk. And this is the first time that they've seen each other in 3 years, and Luther is relieved. And after Luther explains why his face is all beat up, he explains how he met her husband. And she doesn't want to talk about her husband at the moment because her kind of boyfriend is in front of her and her husband are fighting, but he says, no, I'm just happy this whole time you weren't alone. She reassures him that she didn't forget about him. In fact, she didn't forget about any of them. And she figured that Five would be back. But the last time Five time jumped, he was gone for a long time. They then start talking about what the others are up to because each of them knows a little bit. And Luther mentions how Five was the last one to show up a few days ago. And Allison says, well, that's usually when things go sideways. And Luther realizes she has no idea. So he says, yeah, about that. We did it again. The whole end of the world thing. Yeah, it's going to happen in like 7 days. The two then go their separate ways and Luther goes home, but he's kicked out of his house for breaking the wall. So he goes to meet up with Five. But Five isn't at Elliot's place. Although Elliot asks Luther, hey, do you want to get high in a nitrous tank? And the two are laughing off their sad lives, where you learn that Elliot's dad was a dentist. That's one of the reasons why he has the nitrous tanks. And he left him that building in his will. He also only leaves the house for an hour every single day because he, quote, has his reasons. And his wife left him on their 10-year wedding anniversary for his best friend. And Luther can commiserate because he just lost his job, his house, and the woman he loves is married to somebody else. But they're having the time of their life, as Luther mentions. It doesn't matter anyway, everyone's going to die in 7 days. Now, the last Hargraves kid that we need to touch on is Vanya, who got back to Sissy's farm and tells her how the Swedes are after her, and unfortunately, it's no longer safe for her to be there because she's putting Harlan and Sissy in danger. But Sissy doesn't want her to leave, and she says, well, we can go somewhere. I mean, we can go somewhere for a few days. We don't even have to tell Carl. The issue is Harlan heard all of this and goes bolting out of the house. So Sissy and Vanya go looking after him, and Vanya finds him after he fell into a lake. So Vanya, knowing that time is of the essence, uses her powers to literally part the lake, grab Harlan, and bring him back to shore. And as she's trying to use CPR, she really brings him back to life with her powers. That night, Vanya and Sissy are having a conversation, and Sissy says, yeah, we're not going to tell Carl about this. But Sissy is visibly upset. She says, do you know what it's like to have a man who doesn't see you and a son who doesn't talk to you? You don't even realize the box you're in until somebody comes along and lets you out. And that person, obviously, is Vanya. And the two end up hooking up for the first time that night. And then lastly, there's Five, Diego, and Lila, who are about to go into the party when Five tells Lila, look, I don't trust you at all. Diego might fall for your shtick, but I see right through it. They do then end up getting into the party where Diego asks her, hey, where did you go last night? And Lila lies to him saying, well, I had to go get you gauze. The two start dancing and they're having a good time until something catches Diego's eye, and that person is his mother, or so he thinks. Because when he walks up to her, he says mom, but the woman is real. And he is shocked. He asks, do you know anyone named Reginald Hargraves? And she says, yeah, he's my date tonight. And now he knows who the inspiration for his mother is. But Reginald at that time was meeting with the Majestic 12, and they're talking about Kennedy's arrival and how they're going to take him out. All the while, number 5 is sitting in the closet listening to this all go down, but he makes a sound, and Reginald hears it. So 5 has to teleport out of the closet, but when he does that, he ends up standing right in front of one of the Swedes who were acting like waiters that night. 5 and the Swedes start battling it out, and the Majestic 12 realize that they've probably been compromised, so they agree to meet in their other location. Diego comes upstairs, and he ends up getting double-teamed on. And this leaves Lila with a conundrum, because while she wants to save Diego, she remembers what her mother said. So she grabs Diego's knife and goes and frees up number 5. And the three of them are able to take out the Swedes. Number 5 makes it downstairs just enough time to see Reginald leaving, and he says something to him in another language, but Reginald definitely recognizes what he said. Although Grace, who is in the car, urges him to get in, and as they're leaving the party, Grace says, who was that? And Reginald says, nobody important. In episode 5, you get a look at Grace, Reginald, and Pogo's relationship. Grace was a scientist with NASA, and Pogo was one of the test monkeys. Pogo was sent up into space, and everything was going great until he was coming back into Earth, and he got burnt up. Grace was frantically trying to save his life, so Reginald came in and gave Pogo the same serum that he gave Luther. And together, both Grace and Reginald ended up nursing Pogo back to health and kind of raising him as their own. So back to present day where Lila, Five, and Diego are at that party, but Diego and Five are a little bit perplexed at how Lila knows how to take care of herself that well. All of that on top of the fact that she asks a lot of questions and knows a lot leaves Diego and Five kicking her to the curb. So she runs back to the handler wondering if the handler set her up because the Swedes were clearly going after her. But all the handler cares about is whether or not she was able to get Diego's knife, which she was. As she's patching Lila up, she tells her that you're right. The commission has no idea that we're here. I'm here to fix a wrong that's been wrong for a long time. Lila reveals that number 5 and Diego kicked her to the curb, and the handler says, oh, that's not a problem. I've got a busy day planned. So both her and Lila walk over to the house that the Swedes are staying in, and she has Lila drop off a canister message to the Swedes, pretending that it's the commission. And the message gives them coordinates to locate Diego. But when they go to the coordinates, Diego's nowhere to be found, although his knife is in a tree. And as they get closer, one of them triggers a bomb and he blows up. And that night, the 2 remaining Swedes have a Viking funeral for their fallen brother. Now, as Lila and the handler were taking care of the Swedes, Diego and Five headed back to Elliot's place where Luther is cooking breakfast. And Diego's having trouble figuring out where the hell the Swedes came from, why they're after him. And Five lets him know that they're hired guns sent to eradicate them before they do any more damage to the timeline. But we don't need to focus on them right now because we have 6 days until the end of the world, and the closest anyone's gotten to Dad is him leaving that party. And Luther says, that's not entirely true. Because when Luther arrived in the 60s, the first place he headed was back home. He hopped on a Greyhound bus and arrived at the Umbrella Academy, but it was very different. And when he walks in, Reginald is having a party, ironically enough, talking about time travel and how you can't predict the future. And Luther walks up to him and says, this is going to sound really weird, but I'm your son. And Reginald says, no, you're not, completely blowing him off and dismissing really anything he has to say, even after Luther makes the case that he knows all about Reginald. The moon base, the work with chimpanzees. But Reginald just thinks that he's sent from somebody, KGB, CIA, he doesn't know. And after Luther tells him, I'm one of your kids, you adopted 7 children in 1989, Reginald says, that's impossible because I have a strong disdain for kids, and I would hope that if I ever did have kids, I would expect more from them than what's standing in front of me. And then he kicks Luther to the curb. After this heartwarming story, Diego says, well, the important thing is the fact that Dad is in the middle of killing Kennedy, but Five says, ignore him. The way I see it, we have one option, and that's to get the Umbrella Academy back together. So they all go their separate ways to wrangle everybody up. And that includes Klaus, who woke up in Allison's living room and the 2 started day drinking, and Vanya, who woke up next to Sissy, but they had to quickly get dressed because Carl showed up early from work. And he's pumped because he just had a big sale, but he's making everybody in the room uncomfortable. At no fault of his own, he's just unaware of what happened the previous night. And Carl kind of asked Vanya to take a walk so him and Sissy can, consummate the marriage. So Vanya heads over to Elliot's where Luther and Diego are sitting, and this is the first time Diego is seeing Vanya, and he's still pissed off at her for ending the world the first time. And she says, look, I don't know what I did, but if it's any consolation, I'm sorry. And to his credit, Diego says, no, that doesn't make me feel better. I'm just going through a lot. And as he's explaining his relationship with Lila that nobody cares about, in walks Five, who has located both Allison and Klaus. And the Umbrella Academy, for the first time in the 60s, is back together. The first thing that number 5 does is apologize, but then say, we brought the end of the world back with us. And they have 6 days to figure out how to save it again. And the only lead that they have at the moment is Reginald. And this is news to Allison, Vanya, and Klaus, who didn't even know he was around. 5 goes on to explain that him and Diego have been trying to talk to their father, but with no luck. And while they know that he's probably planning on killing Kennedy, they don't know who or what triggers the end of the world in this war that's going to come on. Vanya brings up how none of them are supposed to be there and what if it's them? Because they've all kind of made an impact in their short time. Allison's involved in politics, Klaus is running a cult, Luther's working for Jack Ruby. I mean, it could very well be them. And Diego is convinced that it all has to do with Kennedy and they were all sent back there to save his life. But 5 cuts everybody off and says, I watched you guys die in this war. Hazel risked his life to get me this information. Now, I don't know if what we did is connected or there's a reason for any of it, but Dad will, and that's why we need to get to him. But Luther has heard enough. He's sick of every time there's an issue, everybody wants to run to Daddy. So he tries to leave, but 5 gets in his way, saying nobody leaves until we figure this thing out. Although Luther's a little bit bigger than 5, and he picks him up and throws him. And when he does that, 5 teleports into the alley. But there's somebody else in that alley, and that's Lila, who is on a rooftop, runs away, and 5 goes after her. Diego goes after Luther, trying to convince him that he's needed in this situation. It's their duty to help save the world. But Luther doesn't see it like that. He thinks they're all overrating their self-importance. Although the two get interrupted when a black car shows up with a skeleton covered in skin who gives them an invitation from Reginald Hargraves that says, "To my pursuers, I'm inviting you to a light dinner," and then gives them a location. Now, Klaus, Allison, and Vanya were just left at Elliot's place, so they go off to get trashed. And they end up back in the salon where Allison is just complaining about her relationship with Raymond, and somehow it turns into telling those that we love the truth because the world's gonna end in 6 days. So Klaus heads back to his cult to address them. Allison heads back to her place where she sits Raymond down and says, "I'm gonna tell you the truth." And then there's Vanya, who heads back to Sissy's and wants to run away with her because they discussed it in the morning, but Sissy is no longer interested in that, saying, "I can't just pack up and leave." Vanya's urging her, "Why can't you do that?" But it's just a different time. And Sissy doesn't feel comfortable just leaving the life that she has, leaving Carl, picking up her child, and going. And even after Vanya continues to plead with her, Sissy just cuts her off and says, "You know nothing about the pressures that I'm under." And even though Sissy really does want to go with her, she says that she can't. Oh, and then Five, well, he followed Lila back to an abandoned warehouse where the two get into a fight, but Five ends up winning it. And as he's got his foot on her throat, the handler pops out of the shadows, and Five is not exactly thrilled to see the handler, who says, "Look at us, back together again." In episode 6, you get a better look at what happened to Allison after she arrived in the 60s. We already know that she went in that restaurant and got kicked out, but when she was leaving, a couple of white dudes were starting to give her a hard time, and she just punched one of them in self-defense, but they started chasing after her. And they chased after her right into the salon, where the women in the salon protected her. She started working there, cleaning up hair, all the while not being able to talk. But as they started to hold those meetings at the salon, she started to take more of an interest. And Raymond also started to take more of an interest in her. Slowly, she did start to get her speech back, and the two started dating and, ended up getting married. And in present day, Ray just is having trouble wrapping his head around what he just heard. The whole backstory of where Allison came from, and the fact that she has this superpower. So he says, "All right, well, prove it." So they head to a tailor that normally refuses to serve black people, and Allison does the trick, and it works. They outfit Raymond in new suits. And Raymond says to her as they're leaving, "Why don't you use this for good? I mean, think of the good that you could do with the movement." But then we realize why she doesn't use it a lot. Because she sees that same restaurant where they kicked her out when they first arrived, and they had the sit-in, and she walks in. And of course, they refuse to give her service, but she does the "I heard a rumor" trick, shutting the guy up and forcing him to pour hot coffee on his hand. And it gets to the point where Ray actually has to get her to stop. As they get home, something isn't sitting well with Ray, and he asks her, "Did you ever use that on me?" And she says, "No, of course not." But he asks, "Would I even know?" And the answer to that, of course, is no, he wouldn't. But then she notices an invitation on the ground, and it's the same invitation that Diego and Luther got from Reginald. And Luther and Diego, along with Vanya, are at Elliot's, and they're discussing whether or not they're going to want to go. And Diego wants to go, but Luther has no interest in it. He just doesn't want to face his dad. And Vanya can't figure out why he wouldn't want to go, and Luther lets her in on the fact that she had such a shitty childhood and all the things that her dad did to suppress her of her powers. And that actually makes Vanya want to meet him even more. But Diego convinces them both to go, saying, "We're going to go in there as a unified front. No more number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. We're team 0. We're together on this. We're no longer children. We're adults, and we'll face him as such." Now, while Diego was convincing them to go, Klaus is facing his followers. And Bennett's been pressuring him to do the right thing and tell them the truth, and he does that, standing up in front of all of them and saying, "I'm a fraud." But they just think this is another teaching of his. Very similar to in Fight Club, the whole "his name is Robert Paulson" thing. They just aren't getting it. And no matter what this guy says, they're twisting it to be a bigger deal than it is. Not actually hearing what he's saying, thinking there's a deep meaning to it, when in all honesty, there's not. And it gets to the point where Klaus walks off saying, "You know what? Here, I tried." Klaus and Ben then start getting in an argument about how Klaus handled it, and Klaus says, "You're turning into dad." And Ben gets really upset when he hears this and ends up running through Klaus. And it's a really weird sensation. It's the first time it's happened, and they both aren't quite sure exactly what just went down between the two. Although two people that saw it, although they're unaware of it, are Ben's crush in the cult and Dave, who showed up at the mansion because he saw a flyer with Klaus's picture on it. And he wants to apologize for everything that happened the previous day, but he also is curious of how Klaus knew all that information about him. And Klaus plays it off like, "Well, I'm a prophet. It's the same reason I know your favorite song, your favorite food, and I know about the fact that you don't feel comfortable in your own family, and you think that joining the military is going to help with that, but it's not." Dave, who knows all of this to be true, is just trying to convince himself that everything that Klaus is saying is bullshit. And Klaus says, "No, in 1968, you're going to die on a hill in Vietnam. Here." And then he hands him his own dog tags, saying, "This is the only thing I have left of you." Dave, who at this point is trying to hold back tears, says, "Well, it's too late. I already enlisted. After our little lunch meeting, my uncle took me down to the recruitment office and signed me up, and I leave next week." And that wasn't supposed to happen. Dave was supposed to sign up for the military after Kennedy was shot. And Klaus is really upset because Dave just told him that it was actually Klaus who kind of pushed him into the military. And as Klaus is trying to process what just happened, one of the followers comes up and hands him the invitation for Reginald. Now, one person who hasn't gotten an invite yet is number 5, who takes his foot off of Lila's neck after the handler reveals that she's her daughter. And the handler has lured number 5 to the warehouse because she has a proposition for him. If he takes out the commission's board of directors, then she will make sure to get his entire family back to 2019. She wants to be the leader of the commission. She doesn't like the direction that it's headed. The thing about the board is nobody knows who the members are, and while they meet quarterly, it's never in the same location. However, she knows who they are and knows where they're going to be. But 5 brings up a good point. What about the apocalypse going to happen in 6 days? And she says, oh, that's not going to happen anymore. And 5 says, okay, well, what about the apocalypse in 2019? Because I remember you saying that apocalypse had to happen. But the handler claims that she was just towing the company line and it doesn't have to happen. And if she's in charge of the commission, then they can freestyle more, not having to stick to the strict directives of the commission. So number 5 asks for some more time to think about it and gets out of there. The handler, however, heads over to the Swedes, who are enjoying a Spitz, and they have no idea who she is, but she gives them the location of Diego, saying that he's the one who obviously killed their brother, and if they want vengeance, to go after him. And the whole reason that she wants Diego gone is because he's having sex with her daughter. She does, however, give them directions to keep number 5 alive. So they head over to try to find Diego, who has already left for the dinner with Reginald, but they don't find Diego, they find Elliot. And they end up torturing him with his own dentist equipment and leaving a message on the ground in Swedish that reads an eye for an eye. Now, all of the kids have gotten to the location of the dinner and they're all planning on who's going to talk first, how they're going to approach this thing, what to bring up first to Reginald, but all of that gets thrown out the window when Reginald bursts the door and he wants some answers. He knows they're not KGB, CIA, FBI, but they seem to know an awful lot about him. They seem to be stalking him, and the weirdest thing is they're all calling him Dad. Why? So 5 takes the lead and explains everything, including the fact they all have powers, and Reginald wants proof of that, and while they don't want to be show ponies, one by one they all start showing off their powers. Diego then once again brings up the fact that they know he's involved in killing the president, but Reginald completely dresses him down and makes Diego feel about 2 inches tall, and the verbal tongue lashing actually brings back Diego's stutter. 5 explains, though, how the world is ending, they need some answers, and Reginald says, well, if you're all superheroes, figure it out yourself, and gets up to leave. But before he does, he has to have a private word with 5. And the first thing he wants to know from number 5 is why he was quoting Homer and in Latin. And 5 explains how Reginald made all the children learn it. 5 then asks what he knows about time travel, because 5 has yet to master it. And Reginald's advice is to stop jumping decades and start jumping seconds. An acorn can't become an oak tree overnight. But that's not exactly the advice that 5 was looking for. Reginald reminds him that seconds can change the world, but 5 was looking for more concrete advice. 5 then apologizes for giving Reginald a hard time when he was a kid, and he's kind of expecting an "I told you so" back, but Reginald just says, that's no skin off my teeth, don't worry about it. And it might be the first normal conversation that 5 has ever had with his father. But without a real idea of how to save the world, 5 is forced to go and accept the handler's offer, where she gives him the information on where the board of directors is meeting, and it's 1982 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Now, the rest of the kids have left the dinner, and as Diego is leaving, he notices that Grace is in the car waiting for Reginald. So she gives Grace the picture of Reginald on the grassy knoll and tells her how he's planning on killing Kennedy in a couple of days. And the guy that she's dating isn't as nice of a guy as he's playing it off. And she might want to ask him about it. And as Vanya is leaving, she runs into Sissy because they delivered the invitation to Sissy's house and she figured that's where Vanya would be. And Sissy apologizes for everything she said to Vanya, but she explains how while she wants to go off with her, she can't. They still live in 60s Texas. But Vanya keeps urging her to go with her, run away, leave Carl, and finally Sissy says, you know what, you're right, let's do it. But we can't let Carl know because his brother works for the state troopers, and if he finds out that I've left, he's gonna hunt me down. The two end up hooking up in the car, but they're completely unaware of the fact that Carl is watching all of this go down from a distance. So in episode 7, 5 has arrived in 1982 Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and goes to the hotel that the commission is meeting at. He grabs an axe and barges into the meeting where AJ is at the head of the table and he just starts chopping everybody up to bits. AJ tries to get away, but 5 cuts him off and smashes that fishbowl head of his. He then grabs the fish and heads back to the alleyway to meet with the handler and hands over AJ but says, all this killing, I'm done. I only did this for my family. And the handler hands him a briefcase and says, okay, well, this will get you back to 2019. By the way, you have 90 minutes to wrangle everybody up. And there was never a time limit discussed, so this really pisses off number 5, but he doesn't really have any other option. He's running out of time to grab everybody without cell phones as they're scattered across Dallas. The handler then goes to address everybody in the commission, saying that it's awful how everybody was killed, but vowing to find out who did this
and bringing them to justice as she takes over power. 5, however, needs to go to the one place that he knows people will be at, and that's Elliot's, where Luther and Diego found Elliot's dead body along with the message of an eye for an eye, although they don't know what that message means because neither of them speak Swedish. And Diego actually thinks that it was done by the feds, although Luther reminds him if it was the feds, they would have taken him in for questioning. They wouldn't have killed him and left the body like this. When 5 shows up, he lets him know that it was the Swedes, but also the fact that they're running out of time and they need to get everybody to the alley within 90 minutes. So he synchronizes some watches and sends both of them out to try to find their brother and sisters. Although 5 is meeting some resistance from Diego, who wants to go and meet up with Lila. And 5 lets him know that Lila was playing you. The whole time, she was playing you to get to me. She doesn't give a damn about you. So be in the alley in 90 minutes. And this is really tough for Diego to hear. So Diego is in charge of wrangling up Klaus. And Klaus has given permission for Ben to possess him, all in an attempt to talk to Jill, the girl that he has a crush on. And Ben and Jill, through Klaus, do end up talking, and she even offers to have sex with him, but it gets interrupted when Diego shows up and says, let's go, we gotta go back to 2019. And Ben lets him know that he's not talking to Klaus, he's talking to Ben, and he even proves it by telling Diego something that only Ben would know. Klaus asks him for just 10 extra minutes, and Diego says, you know what, there's something I gotta do anyway. Just don't be late, be in the alley. Now, 5 went to go find Vanya, who wanted to spend the day with Sissy and Harlan, but Carl said that he needed her, and he doesn't really give any wiggle room on that demand. So the two head off to a farm where Carl says that if she doesn't leave, then he's going to send his own child to a facility where they, quote, know how to take care of his kind a little bit better. He tells her how he's well aware of what is happening between her and Sissy, but it's not going to happen under his roof. So as she is heading back to the house, she runs into 5, who tells her, we got to go. But she wants to bring Sissy and Harmon along. And 5 says, no, that's not possible. She tries to make the case that they're insignificant. They're not going to matter in the timeline, but 5 says, no one is insignificant. I'm sorry. It sucks, but they have to stay. Vanya says no, they're coming with me, and then tries to bully 5 with her powers, but eventually she gives in and says, fine, I'll be there, but I want to say goodbye first. And he says, fine, but just don't be late. And then finally there's Luther, who is sent to go get Allison. And Allison's a little taken aback when she finds out they have about 40 minutes to leave, but the one thing that she's really focusing on is the fact that she can go see her daughter that night. Although Luther makes no promise, saying, I don't know what kind of world we're going to go back to. But she's really upset because if 5 gets it wrong again, she doesn't know if she can take losing everybody that she cares about for the second time. But Luther reminds her, Allison, we don't belong here. Ray then walks in and wants to know why his wife's so upset, and Allison explains and then asks him to come with her. And he says, I can't leave the movement. But she says, the movement's still going on in 2019. But the work that he's doing in 1960 has an impact in 2019 and basically gives Allison his blessing to go. But as she gets ready to go, the Swedes have shown up, posing as vacuum salesmen. And they start attacking both her and Ray, but she uses the I heard a rumor trick to get one of them to kill the other. And he's so upset about the fact that he just killed his other brother that he ends up leaving. Vanya, meanwhile, has headed back to Sissy's farm, but it's not to say goodbye. It's to pick her and her child up. She explains that they have to go right now and not tell Carl. Don't leave a note. Just grab the coffee can full of money and leave. But as they're trying to do so, there's a police roadblock. And Sissy reveals that she did in fact leave a note. And the police in front of her is her brother-in-law, who demands that they get out of the car and Sissy head back to the farm and settle this with Carl. But Vanya isn't going anywhere and uses her powers to take out some of the police, but gets distracted and gets knocked out when one of the police hits her with the butt end of his rifle. Now, Diego headed back to bury Elliot. Everybody felt bad about what happened to Elliot, and nobody thought that he deserved that. So before Diego leaves, he wants to take care of him. But as he's burying him, Lila shows up. And he doesn't want to talk to Lila because she lied to him. She claims that she only lied to protect him. He tells her that he's going to finish that whole save the world and just forget that the two ever met. She then pulls out a flask and gives a toast to Elliot, whose body she's just now seeing, takes a swig of it and hands it over to Diego, and Diego drinks it. But she ends up spitting out her part because whatever was in that flask had rufalin in it, and Diego is knocked out. She then drags Diego's body to go meet her mother, and when he comes to, she introduces Diego to her mom and says, this is my boyfriend. So with Diego being drugged, Vanya being knocked out, and Allison having to fight off the Swedes, all three of them miss the meetup. And it's just Klaus, number 5, Luther, and Ben. And number 5 cannot believe that they screwed up this golden opportunity to save the world. They basically had one job to do: get to an alley, and they all knew it. And he ends up having to throw the briefcase as it disappears back to 2019, knowing that they just screwed up their one opportunity to get back. In episode 8, after the group screwed up their chance to go home, 5 says, you know what, screw this, we're all on our own. Luther knows that something must have happened to the group, so he sends Klaus to go find out if everybody's okay, while he tries to work on 5. And 5 has a backup plan, although it's really risky. He knows that his assassin self is going to show up to kill Kennedy, and when that happens, he's going to be armed with a briefcase. But the issue is you're not supposed to go and talk to yourself. And when this happens and you get too close, you go through the 7 stages of paradox psychosis. And those 7 stages are number 1, denial, number 2, itching, number 3, extreme thirst and urination, number 4 is excessive gas, number 5 is acute paranoia, number 6 is uncontrolled perspiration, and then finally, homicidal rage. And even though it's a Hail Mary, 5 knows that he needs to try. And he wants Luther to come along as a spotter, telling him no matter what I do or say, we need that briefcase. So the two head off to the bar where they know that older 5 is going to be, and Luther says, why don't we just run up and grab the briefcase? But 5 says, you idiot, we're trained to protect those things with our lives. We can't do that. I think the best method is just to go up and talk to the guy. So Luther volunteers to go up first, saying that it's going to be a little weird if your mini-me walks up to you in a bar, so let me just warm him up a bit. So Luther walks up to the older 5 and mentions how he's number 1. He's calling 5 by name, and then finally it clicks with the older 5 that, oh my god, Luther is standing in front of me, what are you doing here? But Luther can also tell that the older 5 is a little freaked out because he's got his hand on the briefcase and he's ready to jet out of the bar. So Luther says, whoa, wait, before you go, I have someone you have to meet and talk to. And that's when 5 reveals himself to the older 5. So the 3 sit down to have a beer, and older 5 wants to know why exactly he's talking to his younger self. And 5 explains how in an hour on the grassy knoll, he's going to break his contract with the commission. He's already thought about doing it, but he actually goes through with it. However, when he portals back to 2019, he gets the math wrong and he's stuck in a prepubescent boy's body. Luckily for the older 5, however, younger 5 has fixed the math. Here's the thing though, 5 needs the older 5 to jump, because if he doesn't, then 5 ceases to exist. But when he jumps, he's going to leave a briefcase behind, and that's what they need. So it seems like a win-win. 5 is going to give the older 5 the good math so he's not stuck in the body of a 12-year-old, and in exchange, they're going to get the briefcase that he's going to leave behind anyway. But instead of getting an answer, older 5 just gets up to use the bathroom, which is one of the signs in paradox psychosis. And when he does that, 5 turns to Luther and says, I don't like this. Something's off. So they both are going through some of the symptoms. So Luther follows older 5 into the bathroom, and when he does that, he sees that he's looking at the eyeball, and Luther explains that the eyeball is inconsequential, and the whole backstory with Vanya, how she actually is the most powerful one. When Luther's done going to the bathroom, older 5 says, look, why don't we just ditch that guy? Me and you will travel back to 2019 with the good math, and we'll save the world. We'll just be nice to Vanya, apologize for everything. But Luther's worried about 5, and older 5 explains how it's not like he's actually killing 5. He'll still be alive. They're really just killing that mutant 12-year-old that's pretending to be 5. And somehow this is making sense to Luther. Luther is concerned, though, that older 5 is going through paradox psychosis, but older 5 reassures him that he's never felt better, which is denial. When older 5 comes out of the bathroom, though, he tells younger 5 that he has a deal, but he wants to get to Dealey Plaza. And they both are paranoid, scratching themselves, sweating profusely. They're both going through it. And Luther never brings up the fact that older 5 just conspired against 5. Now, during this time, Klaus is trying to find Diego, Vanya, and Allison, and Diego was brought in front of the handler because Lila wants to hire him. She wants to recruit him to work for the commission. Lila tells the handler that Diego can handle himself in the field and he'd be a great addition. And maybe more importantly, there aren't a lot of people that like the handler right now, and it would be in her best interest to hire some new blood that might be loyal to her. So after a little more convincing, the handler finally agrees, okay, fine, take him to orientation, but if he screws up, you have to kill him. So the two head off to orientation, where Lila describes to Diego how the commission works and how they keep the timeline in order. She then drops Diego off at orientation, and he just waits for the video to start. Now, Vanya was taken in by the FBI in question because they're pretty convinced that she's a Russian spy. She seemingly popped up out of nowhere with no identification, a Russian name, and it doesn't help the fact that when they speak to her in Russian, she responds in Russian. They're definitely not buying the fact that she doesn't really remember anything. But she gets tired of it and tries to use her powers to get out of there, although another person in the room uses a chloroform rag to just knock her out. So when she comes to, she's chained up to an electric chair with her feet in water, about to be tortured for information that she doesn't have. And to coerce her into talking, they give her some eye drops that might be LSD, might be a truth serum, but whatever it is, it has Vanya tripping hard. And when this happens, she goes kind of to a sunken place at the Umbrella Academy with all of her brothers and sisters and Reginald Hargraves. And she's the last one to arrive at this table. And when she arrives, Reginald is asking her for the answer, but she doesn't understand. And Ben is really the only one to stick up for her, saying it's not her fault, she wasn't prepared, while the others kind of laugh her off, saying how she's lazy, she got hit in the head. And Reginald says, no, that's not true. She deliberately chooses not to remember. Everyone then gets plates put in front of them, and when the lid is lifted, they all have a brain in front of them. And for whatever reason, Vanya just lost her appetite and doesn't want to eat, but Reginald says, why don't you just try it? It'll help you remember. Some memories come rushing back into her, and also on the other side of town, Harlan is now mimicking her actual body, which is being tortured in an electric chair by FBI agents. And when this happens, the lights in the building start to flicker, and the FBI agents decide to turn up the voltage on the electric chair. But back in the sunken place, she's continuing to get chastised by Reginald as he tells her that she can no longer deny her true self. And if she eats one more bite, then she can go. So she decides, all right, I'll eat one more piece of brain. But when she does that, even more memories rush back. Everything that she forgot comes back. But back to actual physical Vanya, the FBI agents still don't know what's going on with her, so they up the voltage yet again. And her powers are starting to come through. Now, back with Diego in orientation, something in his video piqued his interest. It's called the Infinite Switchboard, and in the video they claim that it's the key to everything. So Diego sneaks out of the orientation room and finds the Infinite Switchboard and goes in. But he gets caught by Herbie. But when he finds out that Herbie recognizes him, he uses it to his advantage because Herbie is a massive fan, telling him that everybody knows who he is, everybody knows who all of the Hargraves children are, they're celebrities. Unfortunately, though, celebrities still aren't allowed in the Infinite Switchboard room. And Diego looks at him and says, now, that's no way to talk to a celebrity. Do you know how to use this thing? Because I need to look at November 22nd, 1963, the day that JFK was assassinated. And Herbie, being such a fan, agrees to show him it. But when they rewatch the video, JFK isn't shot. In fact, it's the opposite. The motorcade comes around Dealey Plaza, but the federal building, which is down the block, ends up blowing up. And that causes the motorcade to speed away. And when this happens, the United States blames the USSR, which kicks off a nuclear war. But when they zoom in on the federal building exploding, Diego sees that it's Vanya. And he remembers something that Five said the first time this happened. Vanya is the bomb. And he realizes that Vanya is always going to be the bomb. So he tells Herbie, I gotta get back to Dallas and save my family. And that's when Herbie enlists the resistance. And while they're not much to look at, they are able to get Diego back to 1963. Diego and Herbie teleport into Allison and Ray's living room, and Ray has had quite a day. He's got a dead Swede in his living room. Klaus just showed up, and then some new guy just teleported into his living room claiming that he is yet another one of Allison's brothers. It's just a lot to take in for Ray. And Diego pulls Klaus and Allison aside and explains how Allison is going to blow up the federal building, and they have to head over and stop her. But before Allison does that, she needs to have a talk with Ray. And Allison tells Ray that she loves him, and she knows it's a lot to take in right now and process, but unfortunately, she has to go. And Ray understands. So, Allison, Klaus, and Diego head over to the federal building, but they're seemingly too late, because as they're taking the elevator up, they can tell that Vanya's powers are encompassing the building. And when they get to the floor that Vanya is held at, they can barely get off the elevator. That's how powerful she is. And Klaus says to Diego and Allison, yeah, we're here to help her from the federal agents, yet all of the federal agents are dead right now, so why hasn't she stopped? And it's because Vanya is still in that sunken place. And Vanya, who somehow is connected to Harlan as well, opens up her eyes, and when she does that, Harlan does that, and they both have the same eye color. Now finally, someone that we didn't touch on was Grace, who took Diego's advice and started snooping around Reginald's office, and she found a secret room, and when she went in it, she found plans for Dealey Plaza, and at that moment she knows that what Diego said is probably correct. And when she approaches Reginald about it, he asks her to trust him, but it's too much, and she leaves. In episode 9, Luther, along with the two Fives, head over to the grassy knoll, but Five is on to older Five's plot. He's figured out that he probably talked to Luther about time jumping to 2019 and saving the world with him because he is Five, and that's exactly what he would do in that situation. And Luther admits, yeah, no, you're right, but the guy's making a lot of good points. And Five reminds Luther that while he looks to be about 12 years old, he's actually 14 days older than old Five and thus has seniority. And the issue is both Fives are going through paradox psychosis. And when they arrive on the grassy knoll, the paradox psychosis is getting worse and worse, with Five making a beeline for the briefcase, to which older Five teleports out of the way and the two end up fighting. Eventually, the two both time jump into each other, and Luther grabs the gun and points it at both of them as they both urge Luther to take the other out, and Luther decides to knock down the older Five. And when he does that, Five opens up the time portal to 2019 and tells the older Five, get close to the time portal, I'll give you the good math, you leave, and we take the briefcase. So older 5 does that. Regular 5 explains where he went wrong in the math. But then Klaus throws that fire extinguisher through the portal and it knocks down Luther. And when it happens, older 5 makes a break for the case to try to escape with it. But when he does that, the portal is quickly closing. So Luther gets up and kicks older 5 into the portal back to 2019, but damaging the briefcase in the process. Now, back over with Vanya, Diego, Klaus, and Allison have all tried to get to Vanya, but unsuccessfully. And the only person that's able to do it is Ben. He reaches Vanya and possesses her. And when that happens, he goes into the sunken place with Vanya, where she is crying, mortified at what she did to end the world the first time. She now remembers it all and she's disgusted and doesn't feel like she should live. And Ben goes, "No, that's ridiculous. You're not a monster, you're my sister. Reginald was so scared of your power, he never taught you how to use it. He just drugged you, and that's not right. Dad treated you like a bomb before you ever were one. But there's still time to fix it, because you have your family out there trying to save your life. You're no longer alone at the table anymore. You can do this." But then Ben starts to disintegrate, and Vanya wants to know what's going on, and Ben reveals that he can't go back. Immediately, Vanya feels terrible about this, but he says, "It's fine. I've been holding on for far too long. I died 17 years ago, and the rest of this, it's been gravy." Ben then asks Vanya if she can give him a hug as he's going, and she gladly does that. And then he whispers something into her ear to tell Klaus. Vanya then wakes up in the FBI building, surrounded by all of the dead people that she just killed, and finds Diego, Allison, and Klaus out in the hallway. And they're relieved to see Vanya alive, but they're also relieved because she didn't blow up the building, which means that there's still time to save Kennedy. All right, let me clarify. The only one that's pumped about saving Kennedy is Diego, because Diego is convinced that doomsday was caused when the building blew up. And now that the building didn't blow up, Kennedy doesn't have to die. So he heads down to the grassy knoll as the motorcade approaches, and he tackles who he thinks is his father, but in reality was just the driver that was delivering the invitations to the Umbrella Academy. And the driver hands him a note that's on Reginald Hargrave's personalized letterhead, and it just says, "I told you so." And then gunshots rain out as Kennedy is assassinated. Now, Vanya was somehow connected to Harlan. And when Sissy and Carl went to go check on Harlan, he was in that possessed state, but he also spoke. He just kept repeating Vanya over and over. And Carl is like, "What did she do to our child?" He then picks him up and takes him to the car because he's going to, quote, get him the help that he's been needing. But Sissy grabs a shotgun and stops him from doing that, holding the car up, saying, "You're not taking my boy anywhere." The two get into an argument about Vanya where she admits that she does love Vanya, and she no longer wants to be in a relationship with Carl. But during this argument, Vanya has left the sunken place, so is Harlan. And he gets out of the car and goes near his mom, and when he does that, Carl makes a break for the gun. But the gun ends up going off and the bullet goes towards Harlan, but now he has Vanya's powers, and he ricochets the bullet away from him and ends up killing his father in the process. Harlan then goes in the barn where he's having one of those electrical anomalies that Vanya was having in the FBI building. And that's something that's definitely going to get the attention of the commission, but with the commission, Lila heads in to go talk to her mother, who's getting outfitted to address everybody as the new leader of the commission, when they have a conversation about how Diego only lasted 10 minutes in orientation. And the handler says, "Okay, as per our agreement, you have to go kill Diego." But Lila doesn't want to do that, and she realized that her mom kind of set her up knowing that this would happen, knowing that she would have to go kill Diego. The handler then orders Herb to come in and tell Lila what happened with Diego, and Herb says how Diego stole a briefcase and headed back. But as the handler and Lila are arguing, Herb notices that AJ, who is sitting on the handler's desk, is trying to get his attention in his fishbowl. And when Herb goes over, he sees the number 743. So Herb heads over to the records and finds file 743. And then he goes to find Lila, who wants to know where exactly Diego went, and Herb admits that he helped Diego escape. But then he shows Lila what was in file 743, and it's the file on the execution order for her parents. She was always told that it was a burglary, but this file states that it was number 5 who killed her parents. And it was signed off on by AJ. And this is depressing news for AJ to hear because he knows what really happened, and he knows that the handler must have gotten into the file and changed it, because she's actually the one who was there, and she's actually the one who ordered the killing. Lila is pissed off, and the handler spins this, saying that Diego used her to get this information for his family. And while he's not smart enough to actually orchestrate this, it was all at the behest of number 5. He was the puppet master. So she has completely turned Lila's attention to number 5. And after Lila leaves, the handler knows what AJ did, so she decides to swallow him whole. But right before her coronation, she gets a phone call about the anomaly that's going on in Harlan's barn. And she ends up stabbing the guy who noticed it and then recalling all of her personnel saying that she's going to go to war. Now, after Kennedy was killed, the Majestic 12 end up meeting up in the same restaurant where Reginald met the Umbrella Academy. And Reginald is pissed because they're all patting themselves on the back on a job well done, but he says Kennedy wasn't supposed to be harmed. That wasn't our agreement. But the one member of the Majestic 12 says, well, he pissed off too many people. He just had to go. But hey, we all got what we wanted. The rocket technology that's going to enable us to beat the Russians to the moon. And in turn, when we do arrive to the moon, your interest in the dark side of the moon won't be affected. But Reginald looks at the group and says, you all will never contact me again. And as he's leaving, the same guy says, well, we will be contacting you about all that technology, because if you don't answer, we're just going to tell the world who you really are. And that's when Reginald shows them who he really is, taking off the mask that he wears and revealing himself to be an alien as he slaughters the entire room. In the season finale, you get a better look at how Ben was connected to Klaus. After they had that quick memorial for Ben appeared to Klaus but said, hey, I gotta go. There's some guy waiting for me in the light. And Klaus urged him not to go, saying, you can go whenever. And then the two were connected. Now, back in present day, they all head back to Elliot's and turn on the television to find out that they're all wanted in connection with the Kennedy assassination. They're making Diego out to be a Cuban immigrant, Vanya out to be a Russian spy, Luther working as a boxer, Allison as a social rights activist, and Klaus as a cult leader. Even number 5 is wanted in connection with this because they think he was kidnapped because he looks like a kid. They start talking about what they're going to do, and a lot of them want to go on the run, but 5 says, no, you can't do that because the commission will hunt us down. We'll never get away. Diego then concurs with that, and 5 asks, how do you know about the commission? And Diego tells him how they headhunted him. But 5 can't believe that, saying that Diego is not exactly commission material. And the two start bickering about whether or not Diego is in fact commission material. Vanya doesn't want to listen to this, and she heads upstairs to go call Sissy, but then she gets that feeling that something has happened to Harlan. She gets a memory flashback of touching Harlan when she tried to bring him back to life after he drowned, and she knows the two are connected and she needs to help. So she heads back downstairs and tells her brothers and sisters that she's gonna have to go. Something happened to Harlan and she knows that she's the cause of it. But she wants their help. She wants them to come with her because she doesn't want to do it alone. But just like in the past, they tell her no, saying that they have other priorities and best of luck. So she sulks to the car, but when she gets in the driver's seat, Klaus joins her. And he asks, hey, did Ben say anything to you about me? And she says, yeah, he did. Ben told me to tell you. He was just scared of going in the light. You never kept him here. Which is a big relief off Klaus's back because he felt like he was keeping Ben from something. But one by one, they all start getting in the car, saying that they're not really worried about the commission at this point. They'd like to do some good before they leave. And they also want to be there for Vanya because she's family. And Vanya has a big smile on her face. But when they get to the farm in the middle of Texas, the farm is under a snowstorm. And Sissy comes out with a shotgun demanding to know what Vanya did to her son. She also wants to know if Vanya was lying the whole time about being a Russian spy. But Vanya says, no, I'm not a Russian spy. We didn't kill Kennedy. We're the good guys. And in fact, I'm the only one who can save your son right now. So why don't you step aside? So they all head in the barn, and Vanya is trying to make contact with Harlan, who is in the middle of this kind of tornado-like state, when Klaus notices that somebody is outside in the field. And when he calls over Diego and 5, they say, oh, that's the handler and Diego's girlfriend. So Diego and 5 head out to see what they want, and the handler says how she wants to get vengeance for the person who took out the commission's board of directors. And Diego has no idea what she's talking about, and 5 says, no, that was me. But I did it to get you guys back to 2019. Diego turns to 5 and says, I can't believe you killed the board of directors. You have no idea how messed up the commission is right now. And the handler takes umbrage with this, saying, what do you mean? And Diego tells her how everybody hates her at the moment, and even the janitors think that the commission is going to shit. But they want to end this conversation, so Diego and 5 say, look, you have 2, we have 7, we like our odds. And that's when the handler reveals that she has more than 2, because she recalled all of her agents and she has an army, and they are way outnumbered. So Diego and 5 end up trying to run back to the farm, and amazingly, even though they're outnumbered probably 100-2, and the 100 have guns and they're shooting at them, no one's hit. I just think the commission needs to head to a shooting range. 5 tries to jump to safety, but he ends up running out of energy and the 2 are pinned down. So Diego uses his powers to kind of stop the bullets from hitting 5, as 5 makes a break for the house. And 5 is able to arrive in the house, but they're all pinned down. It looks like they're cooked. And the shooting even caused Harlan to fly into the basement. And when that happens, Vanya says, all right, enough of this. I'm going to take care of him. She floats out of the barn and uses her powers to wipe out everybody. Everybody except for the handler and Lila, because they were protected by this energy field. And that's when you find out that Lila has the same powers that Vanya has. And Lila does the same thing that Vanya did, floating up and saying, okay, now it's my turn, and throwing every one of the Umbrella Academy members back. And when this happens, Allison lands in a pile of hay. Klaus is caught by 2 cowboy ghosts. Diego hits the ground, and then a tractor pins his leg down so he can't move. Vanya getting smacked against the barn and being knocked out, and Luther ends up landing in the house that 5 was at. As the dust is settling, though, the fireplace ends up caving in, and 5 pushes Luther out of the way to save him, with all of the bricks landing on 5. And that's when Lila shows up and reveals to Luther that she also has superhuman strength, and she ends up throwing him out of the house. Allison tries to come to Luther's aid, and then Allison and Lila get into a fight, with Allison trying to pull the I heard a rumor trick, but Lila spins it on her. Lila says, I heard a rumor, and then Allison throws it back at her and says that you can't breathe, and all of a sudden Allison is gasping for air. As Luther is giving her mouth-to-mouth trying to bring her back, 5 has gotten out of the rubble and tells Lila, hey, I heard you were looking for me. As 5 is distracting Lila, Luther, Allison, and Klaus go save Diego. And they're all discussing how it seems like she has all of their powers. And Vanya says, well, if she can do everything that we can do, she's probably one of us. Klaus says, I mean, there was only 7 of us. And Vanya shoots back, well, maybe it's time we consider that there's more of us out there. And Allison thinks this makes sense because Reginald never really told them the whole story anyway. So they all head to the barn and have a conversation with her as she's explaining to 5 why she desperately wants to kill him. And 5 remembers that murder, but he tells her that that murder was ordered by the handler. And in fact, the handler was there that day, which is very uncommon. 5 asks her, I mean, come on, think about it. Why did she pick you? Why did she raise you? She never cared about you. She never cared about your parents. She wasn't after anything in that house except for you. Because after seeing what you were able to do here today, it all makes sense. And that's when the rest of them have arrived and they say, it's because you're one of us. She's in a little bit of a state of denial, and Diego walks up to her and says, our father took us. The difference is, our father didn't have our actual parents killed. Yours did. The handler doesn't care about you. You should come with us. We can be your family. And I get it. You're scared because you know that she's dangerous. That's why you dragged me to the commission. Because deep down, you know that she's obsessed with power. And that is it. And if you just let us, we really can be your family. The family that you deserve. But that's when the handler comes in the barn and shoots them all up. She had been down in the basement where she knocked out Sissy, claiming that she was Harlan's new mom and she was trying to convince Harlan to come with her. But after hearing this crap from Diego, she decided to just end them all. So she's killed everybody in the Umbrella Academy, and Lila walks up to her and says, it's true, right? What they just said. And the handler says, I just hope we can get past this. But when Lila tries to make a move to kill her because in her mind they can't get past it, the handler ends up shooting her as well. The handler then notices that 5 is not dead yet. She goes to kill him, but she ends up getting shot because the last remaining Swede has come back to get vengeance for his fallen brothers. He then walks over to 5 to end the job that the handler couldn't, but 5 remembers what Reginald said, master seconds. And that's when 5 uses the last remaining energy that he has to go back in time about 15 seconds before they were all killed. He stands on the side of the barn waiting for the handler to arrive, and he ends up taking the gun away from her. Lila confronts her the same way, and the Swede ends up killing the handler. Really, the only difference is the Umbrella Academy wasn't killed. It then looks like 5 and the Swede are in a Mexican standoff, but they both put down their weapons saying, all right, it's enough. The Swede, then really with no purpose, ends up joining Klaus's old cult who is leaving town. However, shortly after the Swede leave, Lila makes a beeline for the case, and Diego actually knocks Luther out of the way, letting Lila get away. Luther asks him, why did you do that? And Diego says, it's because I love her, man. Vanya then hears Sissy calling from her down in the basement and heads down there and tells Harlan that she is able to take the power away from him. And she is in fact able to do that, and it seems like Harlan is okay. Sissy is relieved, and Vanya turns around to see all of her brothers and sisters standing behind her, proud of her, and she finally feels a part of the group. 5 and Diego then walk out to the field where Herbie has shown up, and Herbie's overlooking the decimated agents, and the first thing that Diego does is reveal that the handler is actually dead. Herbie then tells him that he has been voted in as acting chairman as they await to vote in a new board of directors. 5 says, look man, the only thing we need from you is a case to get back to 2019. And Herbie, looking around at all of the dead agents who all had cases with them, says, take your pick. But before they leave, they'd all like to say goodbye to a couple of people. Vanya wants Sissy to come with her, but Sissy says that's crazy. I can't do that. I can't go to the future. So Vanya tells her to go to California with Harlan and forge a new life and be happy. But as Sissy is driving to California, you find out that Vanya wasn't able to take all of the powers away from Harlan, as he's gotten this wooden bird that's just floating over his hand. Luther tries to get in touch with Jack Ruby, but he is transfixed on the television and grabs a gun to go take out Lee Harvey Oswald. Allison had left a note in a book that Ray had gotten her. And the note says that the good news is that they were able to do it. They were able to save the world. But, unfortunately, she is long gone. And while she wishes she could be with him, she doesn't belong in 1963. But her time there has truly changed her. And not just her, but all of her brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, Klaus wasn't able to say goodbye to Dave, who shipped off for basic training for the Marines. So the group then gets together and they pack up, grab a briefcase, and head back to 2019, and they arrive in the Umbrella Academy. And luckily, There's a newspaper sitting there that is dated the day after the apocalypse was supposed to happen. So they did it. They saved the world. But when they walk in the living room, they notice that there's a picture of Ben over the mantle that wasn't there before. And then Reginald speaks up, saying, I knew you'd come back. And they're all shocked to see him alive. And he says, well, why wouldn't I be? And Luther says, no, you're right. I mean, it's just good to be back home. But Reginald says, you're not home. Allison then says, what are you talking about? This is the Umbrella Academy. And Reginald says, wrong again. This is the Sparrow Academy. And then they turn around because on the second floor, there are 5 new kids and a floating orb. And then Ben shows up saying, Dad, who are these assholes? And that is how season 2 of the Umbrella Academy ends. I absolutely loved it. And what else I love is the fact that you actually made it to this point of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked the video. Hit the thumbs down button if you didn't. If you know somebody that needs this recap, please consider sharing it to all your social media platforms. If you leave a comment in the comment section and I do not respond, it's because I just stay away from comment sections. Usually they're filled with nasty comments and they make me feel bad. But I do appreciate you guys chiming in either way. Oh, and if you want my opinion on actual things and not just a recap, check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, on where you find podcasts. But once again, thank you for checking this out.